Hi, and welcome back to lecture number 38. Today we're talking about the Compromise of 1850, and the theme we're looking at is American and national identity. The learning objective for today is explain the similarities and differences in how regional attitudes affected federal policy in the period after the Mexican-American War. Now, the biggest issue after the Mexican-American War was what to do about the Mexican cession, all the territory gained from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So the Mexican cession led to heated controversies over whether to allow slavery in the newly acquired territories. The sectional debates we've already talked about. The Southerners want to expand slavery into the new lands, and the Northerners want to stop it because it is a competition against free labor, and that drives down the wages of free labor. That is the basis for what the Free Soil movement or the Free Soil Party was founded on. They supported the Wilmot Proviso in that they wanted slavery to be kept out of the newly acquired Mexican cession. They would allow slavery to continue in the South, but they did not want it to expand. Southerners, they actually wanted more Mexican land from the Mexican-American War Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo because they were bound by the Missouri Compromise line going into this. So that meant the more land that they got below the 36th, 30th parallel, the more land that they could potentially cultivate and bring slavery into those territories. Now, one of the first attempts at fixing this was proposed by Lewis Cass, seen in the bottom right. He was a Democrat and he was a presidential candidate in 1848. He said that the people of a certain territory should be able to decide whether or not they want slavery to be legal in that territory or future state. Let the territory decide for itself. This is going to appear in the Compromise of 1850 that gives us a little bit of a solution temporarily, and then it's going to show up again in the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. But that 1848 presidential election in which Lewis Cass was running as a Democrat was also it also included two other candidates. It included Martin Van Buren as a third-party candidate for the Free Soil Party and Zachary Taylor for the Whig Party. Now, the Whig Party was pretty broken up over the slavery issue, as you can tell from the political cartoon down here in the bottom left. You have David Wilmot putting his Wilmot Proviso on the bottom of the Whig carriage that's being led in opposite directions. One side by Zachary Taylor, the new candidate for the Whig Party for the presidency in 1848, and then Henry Clay, the old leader of the party. Now, the Compromise of 1850 is going to be led by these old guard of senators. So the courts and national leaders made a variety of attempts to resolve the issue of slavery in the territories, including the Compromise of 1850. That's what the key concept says. This old guard was more willing to concede and make compromises. So this includes Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, Daniel Webster. They were active in U.S. politics going back to the 1810s. Remember that Henry Clay was a war hawk during the War of 1812. John C. Calhoun was advocating for nullification during the nullification crisis in 1828. He was vice president of the United States. And Daniel Webster was a senator from Massachusetts, so he was very influential because of the state that he was from. The New Guard, led by William Seward, who is going to become a Republican in 1856, they're more idealistic, they were unwilling to compromise, and Seward convinces Taylor that no compromise should be allowed, that they should continue to try to stick to their guns. But luckily for the old guard, President Taylor died in the middle of his term. Vice President Millard Fillmore, who you can see sitting in this picture in the top right as the president of the Senate, part of his vice presidential duties, he was listening into the debates, the speeches that Clay, Calhoun, and Webster made. Despite all of them having different views on slavery, they were all had in common that they wanted to have a compromise done. So once Taylor had died and Fillmore is inaugurated, he signals to the Congress that he wants a compromise to be made, and it's going to take 5 separate acts of Congress to get this through. And now we're going to talk about the elements of the compromise here. For the North, this is what the North would get. California would be admitted as a free state. They had gained enough people in their state, so because of the 1848 gold rush. So by the time that 1850 rolled around, they had enough people to write a constitution, apply for statehood, and Congress voted them in. They also abolished the slave trade in Washington, D.C., and then Texas ceded some of their territory that they had brought in to New Mexico. And so that New Mexico territory expands. That's why Texas gets its panhandle shapes. For the South, Utah and the New Mexico territories are going to be open to slavery under popular sovereignty. So this is the concept that Lewis Cass had proposed in 1848. Now, anyone that moves into the New Mexico and Utah territory, once it's settled and a constitution is written, they can vote to see if they want to have slavery or not. Now, this is a concession to the South because, as you can tell from this map, the Utah territory, the majority of it lies above the 3630 line parallel. So under the old agreement, the Missouri Compromise, no slavery would have been allowed there. And then another concession to the South is the new, stricter fugitive slave law. This fugitive slave law made it unlawful for Northerners to aid the escape of enslaved people from the South. It made it so that people who were free in the North could be accused of having been a runaway slave and then being taken back into slavery or taken into slavery for the first time. Because of its harshness, it actually led to the North being more on the abolitionist side. They didn't want to be compelled to catch enslaved people who had run away. And this law really made the extremes of slavery and the extremes that the South was willing to go in order to maintain it visible for the North to see, and they didn't like it. And so it really ended up bringing more people to the abolitionist side. And then finally, for the South, Texas receives $10 million for that ceded land. All right, and that was it. So now here's the recap. The territory won from war, the Mexican cession, created more discord within the country over slavery's expansion. And then finally, the Compromise of 1850 was difficult to accomplish. It will not be a permanent solution to the question of slavery because in 1854, parts of it are going to be made null by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and then of course by 1860, South Carolina is going to secede from the Union after the election of Abraham Lincoln, leading to the Civil War. So this compromise really only takes 10 years for everything to be undone. All right, thank you for watching. Please come back for the next lecture, and I'll see you then.